So there's a couple more things we need to do before we can actually run the k-means clustering algorithm. First thing we want to do is figure out the distance from each customer's purchase vector in the cluster centroid. We want to figure out which is the closest cluster. So distance to closest centroid, and let me spread this column out so we can see that. And then also we want to know which, what is each person's assigned cluster for now, and that number is going to change obviously after we run the algorithm. So the first thing we'll do is use the min function, which will just return the lowest of the numbers here. Of course, if they're equal, it's just going to go with the first value. And then we will go to distance, then we will use the match function to determine their assigned cluster, which is going to be the lowest cluster now. So first off, we use the distance to closest centroid as the lookup value, comma, select all three of these cells for the lookup array, and then we type a 0 as the third argument in the match function, so that way it'll actually return the actual value. And so now we know that their assigned cluster is 1. So just to make sure that these are all going to work out, do I need to put any dollar signs? I don't think so, not here. And I don't think so. I don't think I need a dollar sign here either. So now I can select those two cells, drag it over, so that it is for all customers. Of course, all of these numbers that you see here are just preliminary, and they're just based on the fact that we have these empty centroids. All of the centroids are at the same location currently because we haven't set any values on them. So the next thing we want to do is get a number that sort of represents like the average or aggregate distance between each customer's purchase vector and the cluster centroids. So we're going to end up summing up a bunch of numbers, and that number that we're going to sum up is the distance to the closest centroid. So I'm going to select K37 here, Command Shift arrow key, so that I go all the way, get all customers, close parentheses, enter. And now we have this number, 174.63. Now you're going to find a lot of the problems that we work with in this course, we are trying to minimize or maximize some value. In k-means clustering, we want to minimize the distance between each centroid and the locations of the customers that belong to the clusters. So we're going to use something called the evolutionary solver. So we need to actually install the solver. First, it's really easy. Just click on Tools, and there will be an option there to install the solver. If you have trouble with that, you can Google it, and if you have a lot of trouble with it, just send me a message. The instructions are also in our text. Click on Solver. And our objective cell, we've already got our cursor there, so we want to make sure that we set objective to E37. We want to minimize that, and we want to change some values in order to minimize that. So we go to by changing variable cells, and we select H2 through J33. We want to add a constraint that all of these numbers, H2 through J33, are less than or equal to 1. Click Add, click OK. Whoops, excuse me, cancel. Now we have this constraint here in the window. Evolutionary solver we selected, but we want to click on options real quick and beef that up a little bit. Click on the evolutionary tab. I'm going to set this number actually. So we want to set the maximum time without improvement to something really large. So I'm going to set mine to 600 seconds. And you'll note that in our text, these values might be a little bit different from what you have. You can set yours to the way the author has his, or you can just leave it as is. A lot of times it does take quite some time for solver to find a solution. So setting this value, the maximum time without improvement, pretty high is a good idea. So click OK. Why don't we go ahead and close this out, just because I want to set some conditional formatting here so you can kind of see a little bit better what's going on. This isn't completely necessary to do this. You won't even see it just yet. Now let's go Tools, back to Solver. Our objective, our changing variable cells, and our constraints should all still be in there, our options that we set. So now all we have to do is click Solve, and now you can actually see Solver at work. As I mentioned earlier, it was going to tinker with the locations. The algorithm is tinkering with the locations of the cluster centroids until it minimizes this number down here. And once it's found some solution and it can't find any solution that's better, it's going to stop. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording, and I'm going to come back whenever my solver has finished. Okay, so my solver made it down to 148.75. Your solver might make it even lower, maybe a little bit higher. But this is the number we were able to minimize by tinkering with the values in columns H, I, and J. So now we have cluster assignments, and if you look at row, excuse me, just messed up my formula. Oops. If you look at rows, if you look at row 38, starting at column K, you can see that each customer now has an assigned cluster that they belong to. And some people belong to cluster 1, cluster 2, and cluster 3. In the next video, I'll show you how to actually interpret what these clusters actually mean.